She pressed the gas pedal while I was still climbing into the car, and in that small, calculated movement, my daughter-in-law told me exactly what she thought of me. The ocean breeze was strong that afternoon, carrying salt and sunscreen, and the loud joy of tourists who believed vacations could fix everything. The beach house stood behind us, white and proud against the blue sky, rented under my son's name, but partially paid for with money that had once quietly left my own account. I remember thinking, just moments before it happened, that I was grateful to still be healthy enough to travel. 73 years old. Knees not what they used to be, balance something I respect instead of take for granted. The Cadillac SUV sat high off the sand-dusted driveway, glossy and black and far too tall for someone my age to enter carelessly. I placed one hand firmly on the inside handle, and lifted my foot slowly onto the running board. I do not rush my movements anymore. I measure them. I prepare. I steady myself before shifting my weight. And that is precisely when she did it. The engine hummed. And then the vehicle jerked forward just enough to destabilize me. Not enough to throw me down. Not enough to cause injury. Just enough to make me lose dignity. My body tilted forward unexpectedly. My hand tightened around the handle as the sole of my sandal slipped slightly against the metal step. For a brief second, my heart jumped into my throat, not from fear of falling, but from the realization that this was intentional. When I regained my footing and looked through the open window, I saw her face turn toward my son, sunglasses sliding down her nose as she laughed. "Oh my God," she said, her voice light and theatrical. "I thought she was already in." She did not look concerned. She looked entertained. My son turned halfway in his seat, his arm draped casually across the center console. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, already facing forward again before I had fully answered. "You okay?" Not outrage. Not correction. Not even mild irritation at his wife's behavior. Just convenience. I climbed into the back seat carefully, adjusting my skirt so it would not wrinkle, closing the door with a calmness that took effort I will never describe to him. I folded my hands in my lap and stared out at the ocean stretching wide and endless beside the road. I have lived long enough to recognize humiliation when it is being offered politely. Brittany continued speaking as though nothing had happened. She adjusted the mirror, smiled at herself, and said something about how beach parking always makes her nervous. She laughed again, softer this time, as if replaying the moment privately. The children giggled in the third row, not fully understanding what they had just witnessed, but sensing that their mother found it amusing. And I understood something in that car that afternoon with complete clarity. This was not clumsiness. This was a test. A small, subtle reminder of position. She wanted me to feel old. In the way she emphasized how tricky it must be to climb into larger vehicles. In the way she later added, "Maybe next time we should rent something lower to the ground, for comfort." Comfort. Such a gentle word when it is used as a weapon. The drive to the restaurant was short, but I observed everything. Brittany accelerated harder than necessary, braked suddenly twice, and each time she glanced at me in the rearview mirror, watching for reaction. She was waiting for a complaint, a sharp word, a sign of fragility. I gave her none. I sat upright, composed, steady. But inside something shifted. See, people assume grandmothers are harmless, decorative, background figures in family photographs. They forget we are often the architects of everything they now take for granted. That Cadillac? I recognized the bank statement the day the down payment cleared. The beach house? My temporary loan had helped secure it. My son had always framed it as short-term support. "Just until things stabilize, Mom," he would say, kissing my cheek quickly before rushing back to his carefully curated life. And I had nodded, because that is what mothers of my generation were trained to do. We nod. We support. We smooth. But as I looked at Brittany's reflection in that mirror, at the satisfaction she thought she was hiding, I felt something unfamiliar settle inside me. Not anger. Not even hurt. Clarity. When we arrived at the restaurant parking lot, she turned off the engine and twisted around in her seat with exaggerated brightness. "Everybody good back there?" she asked sweetly. Her eyes lingered on me. She was checking for damage. I smiled. "Yes," I said calmly. "I'm perfectly fine." And in that moment, I made a decision she would not see coming. Because she believed the worst thing she could do to me was make me feel small. What she did not understand was that I had spent decades quietly building the very foundation she now stood on. And foundations can be rearranged. That evening at dinner, as the sun set over the water, and Brittany laughed a little too loudly at stories that were not that funny, I watched her closely. I watched my son. And I began calculating something far more stable than revenge. I began calculating consequences. And she had no idea that the car she used to humiliate me was about to become the very thing that taught her never to touch what isn't hers again. That night at dinner, she watched me the way some women watch stray animals. Curious, mildly irritated, certain they're superior. The restaurant was one of those waterfront places with white string lights draped across wooden beams, the kind designed to look effortless but calculated down to the last oyster shell. The air smelled like butter and salt, and families around us laughed loudly, glasses clinking, children spilling lemonade without consequence. We were seated at a round table near the railing. The ocean stretched out behind Brittany like a backdrop chosen specifically for her social media. She positioned herself carefully before sitting down, angling her chair so the sunset hit her hair just right. I noticed that. I notice everything. Daniel ordered a bottle of wine without asking what I preferred. He used to know. When he was younger, he would glance at me first before making decisions. Now he looked at her. Always her. When the menus came, Brittany leaned toward me with that same polished smile. They have smaller portions too, she said gently. Sometimes the servings here are overwhelming. Overwhelming. As if I might not manage a plate. As if age had reduced me to something fragile and uncertain. I'll have the grilled snapper, I said evenly, closing the menu. Full portion. She blinked, just briefly. Then she laughed. Of course, she replied, her tone suggesting I had surprised her. The children were restless. Brittany corrected them constantly but softly, in that curated way that signals performance rather than discipline. Daniel mostly stared at his phone, answering emails even on vacation. I sat quietly, observing the dynamic like someone studying weather patterns before a storm. And then she did it again. The waiter brought our drinks. As he placed my glass near me, Brittany reached across the table for the bread basket and accidentally bumped my elbow. Wine sloshed dangerously close to the edge. Oh my gosh, she gasped, but she was smiling. Daniel grabbed a napkin quickly. Careful, Mom. Careful. I had not moved. I met her eyes directly this time. She held my gaze for 2 full seconds before looking away. It was not clumsiness. It was territorial. The kind of subtle dominance some women practice when they feel threatened by presence alone. I leaned back in my chair, straightened my pearls and said nothing. Because silence can be louder than confrontation. Throughout dinner, she told stories that gently excluded me. She referenced vacations I had not been invited to, friends I had never met, conversations that clearly happened about me, but never with me. At one point she said, Daniel and I were just talking about how different things are for our generation. Our generation. The phrase hung in the air like a curtain being drawn. Daniel nodded. Yeah, we just see life differently, he added casually. I felt that sentence settle somewhere deep, not painfully but firmly. Differently. As if I belonged to something outdated. After dinner, we walked along the beach. The sand was uneven beneath my shoes, and I took careful steps. Brittany walked ahead, her hand wrapped around Daniel's arm, occasionally glancing back, not to assist me, but to measure the distance. At one point, she slowed just enough to let me catch up. You know, she said lightly, beach houses can be tricky for older guests. All those stairs. Older guests. I had stayed in that house before they were married. I had sent them the listing. I had transferred part of the deposit. But I simply nodded. Yes, I said. Stairs reveal who built the house well. She tilted her head slightly, confused by the tone but unable to challenge it. Later that evening, back at the beach house, the children ran upstairs while Daniel opened his laptop again. Brittany began unpacking groceries she had bought earlier. I offered to help. Oh no, she said quickly. You should rest. Rest. I had driven 6 hours alone to get there. I had managed my own home for decades without assistance. But she wanted me seated. contained. I noticed something then that sharpened my clarity even further. When Brittany believes she has control, she relaxes. She hums to herself. She moves confidently. She assumes permanence. But she does not understand history. She does not understand paperwork. She does not understand the quiet authority of someone who has already lived through loss, divorce, debt, and rebuilding. That night, I lay awake in the guest bedroom listening to the ocean and the faint hum of the house settling. I replayed the car incident in my mind. The wine glass. The older guest's comment. Individually, they were small. Together, they formed a pattern. And patterns are rarely accidental. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Brittany's voice, low and sharp, filtered through the walls. "She's going to need more help eventually," she said. Daniel replied softly, something I couldn't fully hear. "I just don't want it all falling on us," she continued. "We have our own life." It all falling on us. The words did not wound me. They clarified something. They were not planning a future that included supporting me. They were planning one that quietly prepared to control me. And that is when my decision deepened. This was not about pride. This was about positioning. The Cadillac in the driveway, the accounts linked to Daniel's name, the automatic transfers I had set up years ago, just in case. All of it suddenly looked different to me. Support, when unexamined, becomes entitlement. And entitlement, when challenged, reveals character. The next morning would bring another small incident. Another subtle push. Another test of how much I would tolerate. She believed she was shaping the hierarchy of this family. What she did not realize was that I had already begun reshaping the foundation. And foundations, once shifted, change everything built on top of them. The moment I understood that Brittany didn't just want to embarrass me, but wanted to erase me, happened the next morning in front of strangers. It was barely 9 o'clock. The sun was already bright, the kind of sharp coastal light that exposes everything without mercy. The children were excited about going to the boardwalk, and Daniel was distracted, pacing with his phone pressed to his ear, discussing some urgent client matter that apparently couldn't survive 2 days without him. Brittany stood in the kitchen island area, car keys spinning around her finger again like a symbol of ownership. "I'll drive," she said brightly. Of course she would. I had slept poorly, not because I was hurt, but because clarity can keep a mind active. I had replayed her words from the night before. We have our own life. I just don't want it falling on us. Falling. As if I were a burden waiting to collapse. We walked outside together. The driveway was busy with neighboring families loading beach chairs and coolers into their vehicles. People waved politely. A few glanced in our direction. Public settings change behavior. Or reveal it. I approached the Cadillac slowly again. This time I made sure to open the door fully before placing my hand inside. I was deliberate. Careful. And she waited. She waited until I had lifted my foot and shifted my weight. Then she pressed the unlock button repeatedly. Click. 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 The automatic locks jumped erratically under my hand. "Oh my gosh, these locks are so sensitive," she laughed loudly. "They confuse older people sometimes." A woman 2 cars overturned her head. I felt heat rise slowly, not on my face but in my chest. Daniel was already seated in the front, buckling his seatbelt. "Britt, knock it off," he said lightly, but he was smiling. Smiling. I steadied myself and climbed in without responding. My movements were slower now, not because I was weak, but because humiliation makes your body careful. She shut the driver's door harder than necessary and started the engine. "Mom," she said, adjusting the rearview mirror to look directly at me. "You know, maybe next time you should sit in the front. It might be easier for you." Easier. Easier for her to monitor me. Easier for her to control the narrative. "I'm fine where I am," I replied calmly. We drove toward the boardwalk. Traffic was heavy. Pedestrians crossed unpredictably. Brittany made a show of exaggerated caution. "Oh my God, this is chaos," she muttered dramatically. "I swear I need 3 sets of eyes." Then she added, loud enough for everyone to hear, especially with seniors in the car. The word landed differently than mom. Señor. Not family. Not grandmother. A category. A liability. When we arrived, parking was tight. Daniel stepped out quickly, helping the children. Brittany lingered in her seat just long enough for me to begin opening the door myself. And then she shifted the car slightly. Just inches. Enough to make the door push back toward me. "Oh," she exclaimed. "So the incline." There was no incline. Two teenage girls walking past stopped briefly watching. One of them whispered something and laughed. It was not loud, but I heard it. And in that instant, something inside me crystallized into something solid and unmovable. I closed the door again, waited, then opened it fully once she had completely turned off the engine. I stepped out carefully, straightened my jacket, lifted my chin. Dignity is a posture before it is a feeling. As we walked toward the boardwalk shops, Brittany looped her arm through Daniel's and lowered her voice, but not low enough. "I just worry about her balance," she said. "We might have to start thinking ahead." Thinking ahead. Planning. Positioning. Daniel sighed softly. "We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out." As though I were a logistical problem. As though my independence were already declining. As though decisions about my future were conversations happening without me. And then it happened. We were entering a small boutique gift shop when Brittany stopped suddenly, forcing me to nearly collide into her. "Oh, careful," she said sharply, loud enough for the store clerk to hear. She almost fell. I had not almost fallen. But now the clerk was looking at me with that polite, cautious smile reserved for the elderly. "I'm perfectly steady," I said clearly. Brittany tilted her head sympathetically. "Of course you are." "Of course." Daniel avoided eye contact. And in that store, surrounded by scented candles and seashell ornaments, I realized something painful, but powerful. She wasn't just teasing. She was building a narrative. One where I was fragile, unstable, a future responsibility. And if that narrative solidified, decisions would follow. Access. Authority. Control. The Cadillac keys. The linked accounts. The automatic monthly transfers. The co-signed vehicle registration still partially under my legal authority, because Daniel had once needed my credit to secure the loan. They believed time was on their side. They believed age automatically meant surrender. They did not realize something crucial. I built my life from nothing twice. I survived a divorce that left me with debt and a toddler. I worked bookkeeping for 30 years. I understand paperwork better than Brittany understands manipulation. By the time we left the boardwalk that afternoon, I was no longer observing passively. I was evaluating strategically. Because humiliation, when repeated, stops being accidental. And when someone begins positioning you as weak, you quietly remind them who holds the structure in place. That evening after dinner, when everyone went upstairs, I remained at the kitchen table alone. The Cadillac keys lay on the counter where Brittany had dropped them casually. I walked over, picked them up, turned them over in my palm. The registration paperwork was still stored in the glove compartment, and the original co-signature had never been legally removed. Not fully. I placed the keys back exactly where she left them. And for the first time since arriving at that beach house, I smiled. Because the car she used to make me look powerless was not entirely hers. And she had absolutely no idea. The most dangerous thing about being underestimated is how quietly it gives you room to think. The house was silent that night except for the steady rhythm of waves folding into the shore. I sat alone at the kitchen island long after everyone had gone upstairs, my reading glasses resting low on my nose, my hands folded calmly in front of me. Brittany had left the Cadillac keys beside the fruit bowl, careless in the way people become when they believe control is permanent. I did not touch them again. Instead, I reached for my phone. Now let me be clear about something. I am not impulsive. I do not act from wounded pride. I act from information. 32 years ago, when Daniel was fresh out of college and desperate for a vehicle to secure his first real job, his credit history was thin and unimpressive. I had stepped in without hesitation. I co-signed. Later, when he refinanced for that larger Cadillac SUV, because image matters in his line of work, I co-signed again. He promised it was temporary. He always promises temporary. But temporary has a way of stretching when no one insists on finality. What Brittany did not know, and what Daniel likely forgot, was that the most recent refinance had never fully removed my name from the title registration. The primary borrower was Daniel, yes. But I remained legally tied to the asset. Not symbolically. Legally. I opened my banking app first. 3 automatic transfers were still active. Monthly support categorized under gentle labels. Family assistance, temporary bridge, shared expense. Shared. I stared at that word for a long moment. Shared implies equality. There was nothing equal about what I had witnessed over the last 48 hours. I did not cancel anything that night. I am not reckless. Instead, I opened my email and searched for the original loan documents. They were exactly where I keep everything important. Organized, dated, archived. Years of bookkeeping taught me one lesson above all others. If it isn't documented, it doesn't exist. I found the digital copy of the Cadillac refinance agreement. I scrolled slowly, carefully. My name appeared exactly where I remembered it. Co-owner. Not guarantor. Co-owner. That distinction matters. Ownership is leverage. Guarantee is obligation. And I was no longer interested in obligation without respect. The next morning, Brittany was cheerful again. Almost glowing. She had no idea the ground beneath her was being examined for structural weaknesses. We spent the day at the beach. She made a show of carrying heavy bags while commenting lightly about how some people shouldn't strain themselves. Daniel remained distracted. The children built sandcastles that would collapse by sunset. I watched everything through a new lens. Because once you decide to act, every detail becomes useful. That afternoon, while everyone napped, I excused myself to rest. Instead, I closed the guest bedroom door and made 3 calls. The first was to my bank. I requested a full review of outgoing automatic transfers. Not cancellation, review. I asked specific questions about notice periods and authorization procedures. The representative was polite, respectful. They confirmed what I already suspected. As primary account holder, I could suspend any recurring transfer immediately. Immediately. The second call was to the lending institution that held the vehicle loan. I spoke calmly, clearly. I inquired about title structure, refinancing options, ownership adjustments, hypothetical scenarios. Are you looking to restructure the loan? The agent asked. I'm looking to clarify my position, I replied. Clarity unsettles people more than anger ever does. By the end of that call, I understood something crucial. If I initiated a title modification under specific conditions, Daniel would need to either refinance independently, without my credit, or agree to a formal ownership transfer. And given what I now knew about their cash flow, refinancing a loan would not be simple. The third call was the quietest. My attorney. I did not explain everything. I did not dramatize. I simply scheduled an appointment for the following week when I returned home. When I rejoined the family downstairs, Brittany was pouring lemonade into tall glasses. She smiled at me as though nothing in the world had shifted. How was your nap? She asked. Rested. That word again. I'm feeling very clear, I replied. She blinked slightly, then returned to stirring her drink. That evening, as we prepared to leave for dinner again, she tossed the Cadillac keys toward Daniel carelessly. Babe, you drive tonight, she said. I don't want to deal with parking. Deal with. Everything to her was something to manage. Daniel caught the keys midair. I noticed the small hesitation in his hand. He has always sensed shifts before he understands them. As we drove, I studied the interior of that SUV more carefully than before. The leather seats. The navigation system. The quiet hum of the engine. Assets are not emotional. They are structural. And structures can be reorganized. When we returned to the beach house later that night, Brittany lingered by the staircase as I climbed slowly. Be careful, she called out sweetly. I turned slightly and met her eyes. I always am, I said. And for the first time since arriving, she did not smile back. Because something in my tone told her what her instincts were beginning to whisper. The woman she thought she was weakening was repositioning. And when we returned home at the end of that vacation, she would discover that some keys do not unlock what you assume they do. When we returned from the beach, nothing looked different on the outside. That is how real shifts begin. Daniel dropped me off at my house before heading back to his place across town. He carried my suitcase to the porch, kissed my cheek quickly, and told me to get some rest. Brittany stayed in the passenger seat, engine running, sunglasses on even though the sun was already lowering behind the trees. She waved with 2 fingers. That same polished smile. As if the vacation had been perfectly pleasant. As if she hadn't spent 3 days subtly rehearsing my decline. I stood on my porch and watched the Cadillac pull away. The vehicle moved smoothly down the street. The same vehicle whose paperwork sat neatly in my filing cabinet. The same vehicle whose monthly payment I had quietly supplemented for the last 18 months. Temporary support. I went inside my home slowly. Set my suitcase down. Walked through each room like I always do after being away. Checking windows, adjusting blinds, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender cleaner and wood polish. My home has never made me feel small. That matters. I sat at my desk before I even unpacked. I opened my banking dashboard. 3 automatic transfers glowed on the screen. Family assistance, $1,200. Shared expense support, $850. Vehicle adjustment, $640. I stared at the last one the longest. Vehicle adjustment. That was the Cadillac. When Daniel refinanced, the monthly payment had stretched higher than he anticipated. He framed it as short-term pressure. Just until bonuses come through, Mom, he had said. It's only temporary. Temporary is a word people use when they don't intend to take responsibility. I clicked into the transfer details. Recurring. No end date. No end date. That detail felt symbolic. I did not hesitate. I suspended the vehicle adjustment payment. Not canceled. Suspended. The system required confirmation. Are you sure you want to stop this scheduled transfer? Yes. I confirmed. A small notification appeared. Change effective immediately. Immediately. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence of my home settle around me. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. This was not revenge. This was recalibration. I left the other 2 transfers active, for now, because sudden collapse teaches nothing. Gradual consequence teaches everything. That evening, I received no calls. The next morning, I made coffee and stepped into my garden. I trimmed my roses. I watered the hydrangeas. I allowed normal life to continue without urgency. At 11:47 a.m., my phone rang. Daniel. I let it ring twice before answering. Hey, Mom, he began casually. Too casually. Quick question. I waited. Did something change with the bank transfer? Direct. No small talk. Yes, I said calmly. Silence stretched for 2 seconds. Was that intentional? He asked. Yes. His breath shifted. Subtle tension. Is there a problem? He continued carefully. Yes, I said again. There is power in controlled repetition. What problem? He asked. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I'm no longer subsidizing the Cadillac, I said evenly. Silence again. Then a slight edge entered his tone. Mom, that payment was part of our arrangement. Arrangement. As though we had signed a corporate contract. It was part of your assumption, I replied. He exhaled sharply. We've built our budget around that. And there it was. Built. Their lifestyle, partially built on my quiet support. I built my budget around respect, I said calmly. And that shifted. Another pause. Is this about the beach? He asked. He knew. Daniel, I said gently, when you watched your wife make me look unstable in public and chose not to intervene, something became very clear to me. He said nothing. I am not a liability, I continued. And I will not fund the narrative that I am. His voice dropped lower. You're overreacting. No, I said. I am responding. That distinction unsettled him. We can't just absorb that payment overnight, he said, frustration creeping in. I absorbed it for 18 months, I replied. There was no anger in my tone. Just math. You're putting us in a difficult position, he said. I allowed that sentence to sit between us. I've been in difficult positions before, I said softly. I survived them. He did not argue further. He ended the call with, we'll talk later. We always talk later. But this time, something had already changed. 3 days passed. No further call. On the 4th day, I received a notification from the lending institution. Payment pending. Payment not yet completed. I imagine Brittany checking the account, seeing the difference. I imagine the small tightening in her jaw. For the first time since the beach, the Cadillac was no longer a symbol of status. It was a responsibility. And responsibility reveals character faster than humiliation ever could. That evening, Daniel arrived at my door unannounced. He looked tired. Not angry. Concerned. "We need to figure something out," he said the moment I opened the door. I stepped aside and let him in. "Yes," I replied calmly. "We do." And for the first time in years, he entered my house not as someone collecting support, but as someone negotiating terms. Daniel did not sit down when he came into my house. That told me everything. When he is comfortable, he relaxes into my furniture like it still belongs to him. When he is uncertain, he remains standing, like he might need to leave quickly if the ground shifts too much. "This isn't sustainable," he said before I even offered him coffee. His tone wasn't cruel. It was strained. I walked slowly toward the kitchen anyway and filled the kettle. I do not let urgency dictate my pace. Sustainable for whom? I asked gently. "For us," he replied immediately. "You know how tight things are right now." I did know. I also knew why. "You chose a vehicle that exceeds your independent capacity," I said calmly. "That is not my emergency." He ran his hand through his hair. That familiar gesture he's had since childhood when he realizes charm won't work. "Mom, it's not just the car. It's optics. I need that car for work." Optics. There it was again. Image. Appearance. I turned to face him fully. "You needed me for the loan," I said evenly. "You needed my credit for those optics." He hesitated. "That was years ago." 18 months ago. I corrected softly. He shifted his weight. "Brittany thinks you're making this personal." "Of course she does. I am making this structural," I replied. He frowned slightly, confused by the distinction. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "She feels like you've been cold since the trip." Cold. Interesting how boundary feels like temperature change to people used to warmth without limits. "Did she mention the car?" I asked. He avoided eye contact. "She said you've been distant." I stepped closer, just enough for him to see that I was not fragile. "Daniel," I said quietly, "your wife intentionally destabilized me twice in public and built a narrative that I am declining. You watched. You smiled. And then you came home and continued using my financial support." His jaw tightened. "She was joking." "No," I said. "She was positioning." Silence. "You're reading too much into it," he insisted. "I read contracts for 30 years, I replied calmly. "I know intent when I see repetition." He didn't argue that. Instead, he changed direction. "So what's the solution?" he asked. "You want us to sell it?" There it was. Fear. Because selling would mean admitting overextension. "I want clarity," I said. He sighed sharply. "You keep saying that." "Yes," I replied. "Because clarity removes confusion." I walked to my desk drawer and removed a folder. I placed it on the table between us. He stared at it but didn't open it. "What is that?" he asked cautiously. "The vehicle title structure," I said. His shoulders stiffened. "Why do you have that?" "Because I am legally attached to the asset." He swallowed. "Mom, I remain co-owner," I continued steadily. "Not guarantor. Co-owner." The word hit him differently this time. He sat down. Slowly. "What are you planning?" he asked. "Planning?" As if strategy were something foreign in a mother. "I have scheduled an appointment with the lending institution," I said calmly, "to review ownership restructuring." His face drained slightly of color. "You're going to take the car?" he asked. Now his voice carried something real. I held his gaze. "I am going to formalize my position," I said. "You may refinance independently, or we may adjust ownership. But I will not remain financially exposed while being publicly diminished." He stood abruptly. "This is extreme." "No," I said quietly. "This is overdue." Before he could respond, My phone buzzed on the table. Brittany. Her timing was almost impressive. Daniel glanced at the screen and hesitated before answering on speaker. What's going on? She demanded immediately, no greeting. He's here, I said calmly before he could speak. Her tone sharpened. I told you this would escalate. Escalate. As though I were launching a war. This is not escalation, I said clearly. This is correction. There was a short silence on her end. You're jeopardizing our stability, she said carefully. No. Iraplia. You jeopardized it when you assumed it was permanent. Daniel rubbed his temples. Mom, can we not do this? We are doing it, I said. Brittany's voice cooled. If you remove yourself from the title, we'll have to refinance immediately. Yes, I agreed. That could increase our interest rate. Yes. You're aware of that? Yes. The steadiness in my tone unsettled her more than anger would have. You're punishing us, she said finally. I leaned back in my chair. No, I said. I am stepping out of a dynamic that disrespects me. Silence. Thick and uncomfortable. Daniel finally spoke again, quieter now. What do you actually want? There it was. The real question. I want my name removed from what you used to elevate yourselves while subtly lowering me, I said. His eyes met mine. And for the first time since the beach, he looked uncertain, not about money, but about power. Because he understood something now. The Cadillac was not just transportation. It was leverage. And the person he thought was declining had just demonstrated structural control. I'll call the lender, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. You should. He left shortly after that. Not angry, not confident, just aware. And when the door closed behind him, I sat down slowly and allowed one deep breath to escape my chest. This was no longer about humiliation. This was about ownership. And ownership, once clarified, shifts hierarchy permanently. Power shifts don't happen loudly. They happen in offices with fluorescent lighting and polite rejection emails. 3 days after Daniel left my house, I received no calls. That silence told me more than any argument could. They were trying to fix it without me. Good. Let them see what independence actually costs. On the 4th morning, my phone buzzed at 8:12 a.m. Daniel. I answered calmly. They won't approve it, he said without greeting. His voice sounded smaller than usual. Less certain. Won't approve what? I asked, even though I already knew. The refinance. Not without a higher rate. And they want a larger down payment to remove you fully. Of course they did. Interest rates had shifted since their original agreement. Debt-to-income ratios matter. Lenders calculate risk with precision. And suddenly, without my credit reinforcing the structure, their stability looked thinner. How much higher? I asked. 2.3% increase, he muttered. And they want 12,000 down. 12,000. Not impossible, but uncomfortable. I let silence sit between us long enough for him to feel it. Brittany is freaking out, he added. I could almost see her pacing. Phone in hand. Anger disguised as anxiety. I imagine she is, I said. You're really going through with this? He asked. I already have, I replied. Because that morning, before he called, I had attended my appointment with the lender. I had come prepared. Income documentation, credit verification, asset statements. The bank representative, young, professional, respectful, had reviewed everything carefully. With your profile, he had said, you qualify independently for primary ownership transfer. Independently. That word mattered. There would be paperwork. There would be processing time. But legally, structurally, the vehicle could shift under my authority. Not emotionally. Legally. I met with the bank this morning. I told Daniel now. He went quiet. And, he asked carefully, I have initiated a title reassignment. Silence exploded through the line. You what? He demanded. I am assuming primary ownership, I said evenly. You will have the option to purchase it from me under new terms. Or you may surrender use. He exhaled sharply, somewhere between shock and disbelief. You're taking the car. I am formalizing my ownership. That's insane. No, I said calmly. What's insane is funding something while being publicly diminished by the people benefiting from it. His voice hardened. Brittany says this is about ego. I almost smiled. Brittany has confused dignity with ego, I replied. There was movement on his end, muffled conversation. She was there. Then her voice came directly onto the line. You're blowing this out of proportion, she said sharply. No sweetness now. No palish tone. I disagree, he answered. You're going to embarrass Daniel at work. No, I said. That embarrasses him. Not me. She inhaled sharply. You're trying to control us. I leaned back in my chair. Control requires manipulation, I said. This is documentation. Daniel cut in. Mom, we can't just lose the car. You are welcome to purchase it, I replied. At current market value. Underwritten agreement. With independent financing. Silence. Heavy. Because they knew. Without my credit attached, financing at favorable terms would not be simple. And without favorable terms, the car became expensive. What are you trying to prove? Brittany asked finally. That I am not weak, I said. There was a tremor in her breathing now. You think this makes you powerful? She snapped. No. Ian answered calmly. It makes me protected. The call ended shortly after that. No resolution. Just reality settling in. 2 days later, I received confirmation from the lender. Title reassignment approved pending final signatures. I drove to the branch personally. Signed everything slowly. Carefully. Ownership transferred. Primary name mine. Daniel's status. Authorized driver pending agreement. I did not rush. When I left the bank, I felt something I had not felt since the beach. Not anger. Not revenge. Balance. That evening, Daniel showed up again. This time Brittany came with him. She did not smile. She did not wear sunglasses. She looked unsettled. You actually did it, she said as soon as I opened the door. Yes, I replied. Daniel stepped inside first. Brittany followed slower. The bank called. Daniel said quietly. They said you're now primary. Yes. And we have 30 days to restructure usage terms. Yes. Brittany crossed her arms. You blindsided us. No. Y correcta gently. I responded to repeated signals. Her jaw tightened. This is extreme over a few jokes. I looked directly at her. Jokes are funny when everyone laughs, I said. Not when one person becomes smaller. She didn't respond. Daniel looked exhausted now. What do you want from us? He asked again. Clarity. Accountability. Acknowledgement. But I did not say those words. Instead, I said something simpler. I want you to understand that I am not dependent on you, I said. You were partially dependent on me. Silence filled the room. And in that silence, something shifted permanently. Because Brittany finally understood something she had never calculated. The car she used as a symbol of dominance now legally belonged to the woman she tried to diminish. And this was only the first boundary. There's something fascinating about people who mistake kindness for weakness. They don't know what to do when kindness becomes structured. Daniel and Brittany sat across from me at my dining table like two people waiting for a verdict. Not dramatic. Not hysterical. Just tense. The paperwork folder was placed neatly between us. I had already signed everything on my end. The Cadillac was legally mine. Fully insured under my policy. Registered under my address. For the first time since that beach trip, Brittany was not performing. She was calculating. We just need to figure out a fair arrangement, Daniel said carefully. Fair. Interesting word. Fair begins with clarity, I replied calmly. Brittany leaned forward slightly. You know we can't function without that car right now. I held her gaze. You functioned without it before you had it. Her lips tightened. This is humiliating, she said quietly. And there it was. Not financial strain. Humiliation. The same feeling she had orchestrated for me on that boardwalk. I agree, I said. She blinked, confused. It is humiliating. I continued. To feel unstable in front of others. Silence. Daniel shifted in his chair. Mom, he said, softer now. What exactly are the terms? I opened the folder, and slid a single printed page toward them. Not a complicated contract. Simple structure. Formal purchase agreement within 30 days at current appraised value. Independent financing in their names only. Immediate removal of my financial transfers categorized as shared expense. A written acknowledgement of financial independence moving forward. Brittany stared at the paper. This feels transactional, she said. Yes, I replied. Because it is. Daniel exhaled slowly. You're cutting us off. I am separating finances, I corrected. Why now? Brittany pressed. Why like this? I leaned back, folding my hands calmly in my lap. Because at the beach, I said evenly. You began building a story where I was declining. Fragile. A future burden. She opened her mouth to interrupt. I raised one hand gently, not aggressively. Just enough to hold the floor. You moved the car while I was stepping in, I continued. Twice. You suggested I couldn't manage stairs. You implied I might fall in front of strangers. Her face flushed. They were jokes, she insisted, but her voice lacked conviction now. No, I said. They were positioning. Daniel looked between us. You made me look unstable, I continued calmly, while benefiting from my stability. The words hung in the air like something undeniable. Brittany crossed her arms defensively. You're twisting this. No, I said softly. I am finishing it. Daniel rubbed his face. So what, this is revenge? That word again. No. Iraplia. This is education. Silence. The kind that forces reflection. I am not angry, I said, and I meant it. But I will not fund disrespect. Brittany's eyes flickered slightly. You could have just talked to us, she said. I did, I answered. On the boardwalk. When I said I was steady. She looked down. Because she remembered. Daniel picked up the paper again. If we can't secure financing in 30 days? Then I will retain full ownership, I said evenly. And you may return the vehicle. His jaw tightened slightly. That would look terrible. Optics again. Yes, I agreed calmly. Brittany suddenly stood. So this is about power, she snapped. I looked up at her. No, I said. This is about boundaries. She hesitated. And one more thing, I added gently. They both looked at me. If my belongings are ever treated carelessly again, if I am spoken about as though I am declining, or if I am positioned as fragile without cause. I let the sentence breathe for a moment. Then access to anything connected to me ends immediately. Not raised voice. Not dramatic. Clear. Daniel swallowed. Brittany sat back down slowly. Because now she understood something she hadn't before. I was not reacting emotionally. I was reorganizing structurally. And structural shifts last longer than arguments. After a long pause, Daniel finally nodded. We'll figure it out, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. But this time, the phrase meant something different. They stood to leave. At the door, Brittany paused. Her voice was lower now. You really thought I was trying to make you look weak? I held her eyes. I don't think, I said softly. I observe. She didn't respond. They left. And for the first time since that beach house, the balance of this family felt restored. Not because I took something from them, but because I removed myself from being quietly diminished. 30 days would pass. And what happened next would surprise them even more. Because revenge is loud. But consequences? Consequences are silent. The 30th day came quietly. No estorm. No dramatic phone calls at midnight. Just a date circled on my calendar in blue ink. 30 days of silence tells you everything about someone's confidence. The first week, Daniel sent polite texts. Updates about exploring options. Mentions of credit checks. Casual references to market fluctuations. Brittany remained invisible. The second week, the tone shifted. Fewer updates. More short responses. The kind of messages people send when pride starts interfering with practicality. By the third week, I heard nothing at all. And that told me refinancing had not gone well. Interest rates were higher than before. Their debt-to-income ratio was tight. The bank wanted more liquidity. More proof. More stability. Stability. The very thing they had quietly implied I was losing. On the morning of day 30, I made coffee, watered my garden, and reviewed the official appraisal that had been completed 2 weeks earlier. Market value, slightly higher than expected. Assets appreciate when maintained properly. That afternoon, right at 3:17 p.m., my doorbell rang. I already knew who it was. Daniel stood there alone. Nobody teni. That detail mattered. He looked tired but not angry. Just humbled. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Of course," I replied. He sat down this time without being asked. Growth sometimes begins with posture. "They denied it," he said quietly. I nodded once. "We couldn't meet the down payment requirement without pulling from retirement," he continued. "And the rate would have been almost 3% higher." He exhaled. "It doesn't make sense financially." "No, it doesn't." I waited. He stared at his hands for a moment before speaking again. "Brittany's upset," he admitted. "She feels like you forced us into a corner." "I offered purchase terms," I said calmly. He nodded. "I know." Silence filled the room. Not tense this time. Reflective. "So," he said finally, "what happens now?" I folded my hands on the table. "Now," I said gently, "you return the vehicle." His head lifted slightly. "You're serious?" "Yes." He swallowed. "It's going to be embarrassing." There it was again. Embarrassment. The same word Brittany used. I leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, just enough to hold his attention. "Daniel," I said softly, "do you know what embarrassment feels like when you're 72 and someone shifts a car while you're stepping inside?" His eyes flickered. "Mom, do you know what it feels like to be spoken about as though you're declining while funding the very lifestyle creating that illusion?" He didn't answer. Because now he understood. This was never about a vehicle. It was about narrative. He rubbed his jaw slowly. "She didn't mean it the way you took it." "I did not take it," I replied. "I observed it." He sat back, absorbing that. After a long moment, he said something I did not expect. "She's intimidated by you." That surprised me more than any argument had. "Intimidated?" I repeated. "She thinks you see through everything," he admitted. "She feels judged." I let that settle. "I don't judge," I said calmly. "I assess." A faint, almost reluctant smile touched his face. "Yeah," he muttered. "That sounds about right." Silence softened between us. "So what now?" he asked again. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at my quiet street. "Now," I said gently, "you both learn to build what you can sustain independently." He looked up at me. "And the car?" "I'll keep it," I said. "It is legally mine." He nodded slowly. "We'll bring it by tomorrow." There was no anger in his voice now. Just acceptance. As he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "I should have said something at the beach," he admitted quietly. Yes, he should have. But I did not say that. Instead, I walked closer and touched his arm gently. "You're still learning," I said. He nodded. That evening, I received a single text from Brittany. 3 sentences. "I didn't realize how it looked. I thought we were joking. I didn't think you felt small." I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I replied. "I never felt small. I felt observant. No angif. No lekchev. Just clarity." The next afternoon, the Cadillac returned to my driveway. Daniel handed me the keys. No dramatic exchange. No raised voices. Just a quiet transfer of reality. And as I stood there holding those keys, I understood something powerful. Revenge would have been yelling. Revenge would have been humiliation. This was different. This was correction. They left in a rideshare. And for the first time since that beach trip, I saw something new in Brittany's eyes as she got into the back seat. Not arrogance. Not superiority. Awareness. And awareness is the beginning of respect. But this story isn't finished. Because the final lesson wasn't about the car. It was about something far more permanent. And that conversation was still waiting. 2 weeks after the Cadillac returned to my driveway, Brittany asked to meet me alone. That detail mattered. Not a group conversation. Not mediated through Daniel. Alone. We met at a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. Neutral territory. Late afternoon. The kind of place with soft music and large windows where sunlight makes everything look honest. She arrived early. Another detail that mattered. When I walked in, she stood up immediately. No sunglasses. No polished performance smile. Just direct eye contact. "Thank you for coming," she said. I nodded and sat across from her. For a moment, she just looked at me, studying me differently than before. Not measuring. Not evaluating weakness. Assessing strength. "I owe you an apology," she began. I didn't interrupt. "I thought we were teasing," she continued slowly. "I didn't think it landed the way it did." I let a small silence stretch. "You didn't think I noticed," I corrected gently. She swallowed. "Yes." That honesty surprised me. "I've always admired how independent you are," she said, almost reluctantly. "But sometimes it feels like you're watching everything." "I am," I replied calmly. She gave a small, almost nervous laugh. "That's intimidating." There it was again. Not hatred. Not cruelty. Insecurity. "I am not your competition," I said evenly. "I am your husband's mother." She nodded quickly. "I know. I didn't want to feel judged." I leaned forward slightly. "Then don't behave in ways that invite assessment." She went quiet. Because that was the truth. "I shouldn't have joked like that," she admitted. Moving the car. The stairs comments. "That was unnecessary." "Yes, it was. I was testing dynamics," she added, softer now. I appreciated the honesty. "And you learned?" I asked. She held my gaze. "Yes." Silence again. But this silence felt balanced. Not tense. Not defensive. Balanced. "I never needed the car," I said calmly. "I needed clarity." She nodded. "I see that now." Good. Because here is the part most people misunderstand about strength. Strength does not scream. It restructures. Daniel joined us 20 minutes later. He looked cautious but calmer than I had seen him in weeks. We spoke openly. About finances. About independence. About respect. And then I said something that settled everything permanently. "I will always support my family emotionally," I told them. "But financial support is not automatic. It is earned through mutual respect." Daniel nodded. Brittany did too. "No more assumptions," I continued. "No more positioning. No more narratives about decline." "Agreed," Daniel said immediately. "Agreed," Brittany echoed. And for the first time, it didn't feel like they were agreeing out of pressure. It felt like understanding. Weeks passed. The Cadillac remained in my driveway. I didn't drive it daily. I didn't need to. Its presence was symbolic now. Not of dominance. Of boundaries. Daniel and Brittany downsized to a modest sedan shortly after. Practical. Within their means. I noticed the shift in their tone when they spoke about money. Less entitlement, more intention. At our next family gathering, something subtle had changed. When I walked into the room, Brittany stood, not performatively but respectfully. She handed me a plate before serving herself. Small things, but real. At one point during dinner, Daniel began telling a story about work and mentioned how stressful restructuring had been. Brittany looked at him and said lightly, "We learned a lot about independence this year." She glanced at me briefly. Not defensive. Not sarcastic. Acknowledging. And later that evening, as I prepared to leave, Brittany walked me to my car. Not the Cadillac. My older sedan. She opened the door for me. Carefully. No jokes. No sudden movements. Just quiet respect. "You know," she said softly before I got in, "I don't think you were ever weak." I met her eyes. "I never was," I replied. "Because here is what I learned long ago. People only test your strength when they mistake your kindness for access. And when access is removed, truth reveals itself." I did not take revenge. I took ownership. Of my finances. Of my narrative. Of my position. The beach incident was never about a car door. It was about hierarchy. And when someone tries to lower you quietly, you don't shout. You adjust the structure so clearly that they never try again. As I drove home that night, I felt something deeper than satisfaction. I felt alignment. I had not damaged my family. I had strengthened it. Because now they understood something permanently. I am not fragile. I am not declining. And I am certainly not dependent. I was never the weak one. And they will never forget it again. If this story touched your heart, like, comment, share, and subscribe channel for more stories.